Okay, so I always love the topic of tanzih and tashbih, which is incomparability and similarity. So this is now a continuation of the discussion on the divine attributes, al-sifat al-ilahiyya, from the point of view of his tanzih and the point of view of his tashbih. So you can translate these words a number of ways, but it's tanzih and it's tashbih. So Professor Chittick, he has decided to translate it as incomparability, which is tanzih, and similarity, which is tashbih. So let's see what he says. Bismillah. The discussion of the divine names has been moving back and forth between the essence and the cosmos, since the names are the barzakh between the two. That means the divine names. In one respect, no name can truly denote the essence, since in himself, God is infinitely beyond all things, and none knows God but God, so no name is adequate to denoting God in a simplified manner. In another respect, every divine name and even every name of an engendered thing denotes God, since he is the only true reality, the source of all existence and attributes. So even like chair and table denote his names because they come from his divine names. Or even say Irvina and Aqil, every single name is divine that way. The Sheikh al Akbar constantly alternates between these two points of view. He maintains that true knowledge of God and creation can only come through combining the two perspectives. So we, went into this explicitly in Fasnuh. The perfect Imam, the perfect spiritual knower of God, the perfect Gnostic, is he who combines tanzih with tashbih, or she who combines tanzih with tashbih. He commonly refers to them as the declaration of God's incomparability, his tanzih, and the declaration of his similarity, tashbih. Tanzih derives from the jadr, from the linguistic root nazaha, right, which means to be far away from, to be untouched by, and to be free from. So free from imperfections, free from blemishes, free from faults. That's what it means. Hence, tanzih means to declare. Salam hana, salam hana. Hence, tanzih means to declare or to affirm that something is far away or free from something else. In other words, tanzih is to declare that God transcends any attribute or quality possessed by his creature. Right? Tashbih derives from the root shabaha, which means to be similar or comparable. It signifies declaring or affirming that something is similar to something else, to compare, to liken. Hence, tashbih is to maintain that a certain similarity can be found between God and creation. Uh, Ibn al-Arabi borrowed the two terms from Kalam, where there was a long history of dispute concerning them. Um, as Wolfson has pointed out, the two perspectives must even be considered a basic pre-Kalam problem, of course. It existed before the proponents of Kalam talked about it. For the most part, the dominant theologians criticized similarity as a heretical position, often citing as their opponents various obscure thinkers who claimed, for example, that God had a corporeal body. So this was always the um, bugbear, or is it called bear bug? This was always the bugbear of theology. The fact that Allah SWT describes himself with attributes of tashbih in the Quran, and that sometimes has led people, or people were misled into thinking that meant he had a physical body. So that kind of gave tashbih a bad name. The theologians were well aware that the Quran and Hadith are full of references to God's similarities. What is that? God's hands, God's eyes, feet, laughter, and so on. But they held that these terms have to be understood as in no way similar to what is designated by the same terms when applied to human beings. So it means something else when it's applied to God. Debates raged back and forth And in the end, the adopted formula held that everything the Quran said about God is true, but a person should not ask how it is true, since that is known only to God, right? So this is the formula of nu'min, nu'min bila kayf. It's a very well-known position. That's the position as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah that we sell down upon. Nu'min bila kayf. So we believe that God has such and such, but we don't know how that's the case. We have no idea how. For the Shaykh, incomparability and similarity derive necessarily from the essence on the one hand, and the level of divinity on the other, which is called the martaba al-uluhiyya, right? Because I mean, these are like very dry terms, but we've already talked about it, so it's good to remind ourselves about it. The essence can't be known. So whatever you do know about Allah comes from the level. It's called the martaba. But the essence, you can't know anything about the essence. Since the essence is unknowable and incomprehensible, nothing is comparable to it. Even like when you start talking about it, it's already wrong. But since the essence, in respect of being a god, assumes all sorts of relationships with the creatures, those relationships, known as names and attributes, can only be grasped through our knowledge of creation. By knowing these relationships, we gain real knowledge of God. This knowledge is incomplete and partial, but it is efficacious, so it's effective. It is efficacious on its own level for the purposes in which it must be employed, for example, worship. The names themselves are inconceivable without the creatures and are shared by the creatures in some manner, even if, as the Sheikh sometimes says, that manner is only a matter of a single word shared by two different things, essentially different in attribute. But when he does say this, as in the following passage, addressed to those schooled in the intricacies of kalam type argumentation, he is speaking about the distinction between the name in itself, identical to the essence, and the specific characteristic of the name, which gains a real connection to the created things. It is impossible for the essence of the real to come together as ijtima' with the possible thing in any attribute. Since the existence of every attribute by which the possible thing is qualified disappears with the disappearance of that to which it is attributed, or the attribute disappears while the possible thing subsists. So it would disappear if the essence were to come together with that attribute, because the essence is what? Eternal and pre-eternal. And so when the eternal meets what's called the contingent disappears. But the necessary being, the wajib al-wujud, the necessary being through itself, so wajib al-wujud fi nafsihi aw bi nafsihi, cannot accept that which may possibly be or not be. What's called the mumkin. Since it cannot be qualified by that thing in respect of the reality of the description, there only remains a sharing of terminology. Like if sorry, just a second. So if like I'm called kind, say Kareem, generous, and God is called Kareem and generous, the only thing we have in common is the name. Pretty much. There's nothing else in common. Because the thing that you're calling about me that's generous or kind, it belongs to the category of what's called possible, al-mumkin. And we ourselves are the mumkinat. Now God, he's wajib al-wujud. So his being is wajib, but your being is mumkin. So there's no correspondence between us. So there can't be any sharing in reality in that way. Since the essence cannot be qualified by that thing in respect of the reality of the description, there only remains a sharing of terminology, since sharing of definition, the had, and reality has been rejected, right? What God is defined by is different to what I'm defined by. No single definition whatsoever combines the attribute of the real and the attribute of the servant. There's no single definition that can bring us together. Hence, when we say God is knowing, we do not mean it according to the definition and reality of the knowledge that we attribute to ourselves. to what is called the temporally originate possible thing, right? So the temporally originate thing, that's called the hadith or the muhdathat. So muhdath, right, is the opposite of qidam or qadim, eternal. Because muhdath is from the word hadith, it's new. Like we are relatively new. So temporal means the word temporal means time, in time. We're originated in time. God's not originating in time, he's eternal. So temporal origination is the opposite of eternal. So when we talk about someone who knows something in temporal origination, that's nothing like knowing something from eternity. There's no common measure. There's no common measure. For the attribution of knowledge to God differs from its attribution to the creature. The way we attribute knowledge to God is not the same way we attribute it to the creature. If the eternal knowledge were identical with temporally originated knowledge, a single essential definition would bring together the two definitions. Then, what was impossible for one would be impossible for the other. But we have found the situation different from this. Are there any questions so far? Yes, the drop, returning to the ocean. Hugbear, bugbear, bugbear. But hugbear is also nice.
Yeah,
Any
being
questions?
kind, alhamdulillah. Being kind, mashallah.
Sorry, say it again.
No, it was just because you were talking about being kind.
Yes, yes.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And there's no common measure, right? When we look at his names. Exactly. There's no common measure. Okay. Irvina, go ahead.
Um, is there any part of us that is eternal?
Uh,
Oh,
uh,
I was wondering about how was that called? Hmm, forgot the name. The entity, it's usually translated by Chitik.
the entity, like the Ain? Or
Yeah, is that eternal? I forgot.
I mean, so for example, if you're talking about God, we usually use the word al-that, al-that, al-ilahiyya. That is feminine.
Mm.
And this that is eternal, yes. So his that is eternal without a shadow of doubt. Is our essence eternal? And are we, is there anything about us that is eternal? The short answer is no. Like that's the short, easy answer that you can fall back on. The short answer is there's nothing eternal about us. But there are two things to say. The first thing to say is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wajib al-wujud bi nafsihi, He is the being who is necessary through Himself, when He decides to make us, we become necessary. So there is an eternality to us because He made us. But then what we can say about ourselves is that we are wajib bi ghayrihi. Wajib bi ghayrihi. We're necessary through something else, which automatically means you're not eternal, which automatically means you're not wajib. And the second point is that there is an eternal dimension to us. But in what respect? It's the ayan thabita, the fixed entities, because fixed and eternal go together. So we are fixed in his knowledge. That's the component to us that is eternal. Eternal in his knowledge.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So if you could somehow peer and get a glance into the realm of the immutable entities, into that divine level, you would see your eternal self. So yes, there are eternal things about you that we could speak about. And so there's eternal things to say about you in that realm. And when you're in this realm, there are only things that to say about you that are bound in time, that are temporal. Okay, then let's carry on, inshallah. So, Bismillah. In respect of his names, God has a certain similarity with creatures, but in respect of his essence, he cannot be compared with them. That is why it was said earlier that God has two basic kinds of names, those which declare him incomparable and those which declare him similar, or names of incomparability and names of acts. The first type of names negate from his essence any similarity with the things of the cosmos. The second affirm that every reality in the cosmos has its roots in the divine level. The theme of incomparability and similarity runs throughout Ibn al Arabi's works. God is the coincidence of all contrary attributes. In knowing God, we must be able to put opposites together. As the Sheikh sees it, most schools of thought had failed to make this combination. More specifically, the rational thinkers, by whom he means both the proponents of Kalam, the Ash'arites and the Mu'tazilites, and the philosophers, falasifa, such as Ibn Sina, overemphasized incomparability. This is like I had this conversation with a friend of mine last night. This is the characteristic of like Islamic civilization, really, as a result of our excelling in the sciences and sometimes literally the actual what we call today science, natural biology, and these kinds of things. Our excelling in the sciences and the rational disciplines um, has given us like a inclination towards transcendence and tanzih, a preference for the tasting. Our, our taste buds have grown accustomed to tanzih, and we're not really so fond of tashbih or similarity. It tastes bitter to most Muslims. By ignoring imagination, however, which alone is able to perceive the true meaning of the Quranic depictions of similarity, they fell into a lopsided view of reality. That's just a fact. The rational faculty or reason, aql, which is the specific tool by which kalam and philosophy seek to know the nature of things, wants to negate anything from God which does not appear appropriate to its own definition of divinity, like hands, feet, and eyes. Hence, the rational thinkers interpret or explain away, they do something called ta'wil. So they explain away these terms wherever they find them in the revealed texts. But by explaining away such terms, these thinkers usually miss the point. They miss the point. So it's true that this is like a really good piece of advice. We should believe without asking how. But when you start getting into the risky venture of trying to explain how these divine attributes work and how they're not related to creation, for example, you miss the point. All you need to know, for example, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hears and He speaks. For example, what happens with hearing? What happens with speaking? The fact that He hears means that we can make du'as towards Him. So the Sharia reveals this reality for your sake, so that you can now make du'as. Because if you didn't know that He hears, you wouldn't make du'as. And you take comfort in your heart knowing that He responds to you, right? I respond to the caller of the one who calls me. That's in the Quran. So He speaks. We know that to be true because He speaks, because the Quran told us that He speaks. And we say that Allah grasps things with His hand. We don't need to know how He does that. You just need to know that what does a hand do? A hand grasps something so it can control it. So God controls the things. That's all you need to know about His attributes. What does this thing do? What is the characteristic of that attribute? So then you apply that to your worship. You don't need to know anything else about how exactly He grasps something. So in the Sheikh's view, reason places so much emphasis upon incomparability that it excludes similarity. And that's the job of reason. While the Quran and Hadith have presented us with both incomparability and similarity, it is impossible to understand the full message of the scriptures by accepting only one half of it. This is in the Quran. It's talking about the Ahl Kitab, but it's the same description. It says that they believe in parts of the book and disbelieve in parts of the book, and they try to find a path that's in between. This is in the Quran. And this is exactly what it is. For you to be so grossed out by tashbih and similarity in the Quran, it's as if you disbelieve in parts of the book. The rational faculty can grasp God's unity and transcendence. So the rational faculty understands what is God's tawheed and his tanzih, while imagination is needed to perceive the multiplicity of his self-disclosures and his immanence. So imagination is what perceives his tashbih, and how is he multiple, in what way, and his tanzih is the rational faculty is what understands, perceives God's tawheed, his oneness, and his tanzih, how he's one. To accept the full message of Scripture does not imply that one believes simple-mindedly that God has hands and feet in exactly the same way that human beings have hands and feet. Of course not. So difficult, in fact, is it to combine the points of view of reason and imagination that this task can only be achieved through God's own inspiration. So, be God-fearing, right? This is in the Quran, from Surah Baqarah. What's the exact Arabic? Ittaqullah, ittaqullah. The Shaykh continually reminds us, and God will teach you. Through God-fearingness, taqwa, an important technical term in the Shaykh's vocabulary, the servant can attain to the station of direct tasting, dhawq, or the unveiling kashf of the realities of things. This is the true knowledge that will allow him to combine similarity and comparability, or imagination and reason, without falling into the dangerous pitfalls of overemphasizing either side. Irvina, let me finish this paragraph and then we'll take the question. This whole problem is central to Ibn al-Arabi's approach and will come more to the forefront as we move forward. For the present, a few representative passages concerning incomparability and similarity need to be quoted. Detailed discussions of the relationships that exist among revelation, reason, imagination, and unveiling must be left for later chapters. So he'll actually get into detail about, so there'll be like a whole chapter just for reason, there'll be a whole chapter just for imagination, for example, right? And a whole chapter just for kashf and unveiling. And those will come in later chapters. Irvina, go ahead.
Could you comment on the word taqwa a bit? Is it rightly translated like that, and so on?
Yeah, sure. Taqwa, so God-fearing is a fine translation of taqwa. And even being God conscious is also another good translation of having taqwa. So it's from like a certain two-letter root, which I think is qafiyah or qaf wow. Whoever knows better than me, please tell me. But it means to guard oneself and to protect oneself, right? So someone gave the example that having taqwa is like walking amongst a thorn bush, and you are taking steps very carefully, and you are kind of like moving your clothes very delicately so as not to become entangled in the thorns. So in that manner, you are moving carefully so as not to do an action which is disobedient to God or do an action which he dislikes. That's called being God-fearing. So the Shaykh al-Akbar has this principle, which is when you have taqwa, Allah himself will teach you himself. In whatever issue, in whatever discipline we are talking about, he will teach you. So it's a really mighty teaching.
MashaAllah, beautiful, thank you.
Allah barak fiki. Is that relevant? Taqwa is a two-letter root and relates to balancing tashbih and tanzih. It could be. I was just pointing it out because I was talking about the grammatical side of it. But who knows? There's more to these things than I can ever fathom, quite frankly. It could very well be that there is a relationship. Who knows? There's no doubt, Hannah, that taqwa is one of the keys to actually balancing tanzih and tashbih. There's no doubt about that. Because when you don't have taqwa, you fall down. What do you fall down in? You fall down inclining to one side over the other. But taqwa, it's about balance. When we ask how, we rationalize and constrain God to the aql. This is exactly true. Yes. Another aspect of eternity, he blew from his ruh into Adam alayhi salam, and he took from his light, and from it he created the Prophet ﷺ, and from the Prophet ﷺ created the souls. Yes, yes. His ruh and his light are eternal. That is correct. He then also annihilates everything and brings it back for judgment. Yes. Um, we would say that the light of Rasulullah ﷺ is created. Normally, we'd say it's created. Um, that's how we view it in Aqidah. Yes. In regards to kindness, if one performs kindness originating from the ruh, and you channel his will through you like Khidr, I know. Sorry, I can't read this because something's blocking my thing. Sorry, just one second. I know this is. I know this is incomparable to his kindness, but on a micro level, it allows us to peer into what exactly. It gives you like a glimpse into it. That's 100% correct. That's why it's really wrong to say that you can't know God like 100%. That's just wrong. It gives you a glimpse into it, which is 100% true, mashallah. Okay, then let's carry on, inshallah. So and by the way, if anyone's tired of hearing my voice, volunteer and you're more than welcome to uh, read, inshallah. So incomparability, which is tanzih. Tanzih is to describe the real as having no connection with the attributes of temporally originate things. He has no connection to the muhdithat. He has no connection to the things that are created and originate in time. He who knows God through his considerative faculty, so that's his intellect, his nadar. And nadar is a very interesting word. So nadar here is translated as his considerative faculty, the intellect. But nadar means to gaze. So it's the faculty in your brain, it's the faculty in your intellect that contemplates. It's the faculty within you that gazes into the invisible things. That's what nadar is. And it belongs to the tanzih side of religion. So he who knows God through his considerative faculty looks upon him as far removed. Mun'azal. So mun'azal is separate. As far removed from himself through a distance that demands the declaration of incomparability. So he places himself on one side and the real on the other, calling to him from a far place. What's a far place? This is from where? This is from what? It's from the Quran. Calling to him from a far place. It's in one of the surahs. So it's as if so this is what the intellect does. And I wonder how many people share this view. Because I think this is the normative view of God in religion, Islam or any other religion. I think this is the normative view, is that I'm here and God is there. So we put him at a distance. And if you're really literal about it, then you put him at a physical cosmic distance, which is heretical. We say A'udhu Billah to that. But either way, you're putting a distance between you and him. So the Shaykh Akbar says, that's actually, there's nothing wrong with the intellect doing that. The intellect does that by its very nature. So if any faculty within you is doing something by its nature, there's no blame on that faculty. That's what the intellect is supposed to do. So it would be wrong of someone to say, like, you know what? The intellect is producing an incomplete picture of God, which it is, by the way. So I'm going to shut off the intellect. that is the wrong conclusion. And that's the wrong course of action to take. The intellect is doing what it is supposed to be doing. So there's no blame upon the intellect. The blame is somewhere else. The blame might be, for example, if you ignore the other faculty that looks upon God's tashbih, which is the heart. You say, I'm going to not listen to the heart. So the question is, why would you do that? But there's no blame on the intellect itself. It is doing what it is supposed to be doing. Okay. Some rational faculties are meddlesome, fudul, which is the word for curiosity. Some rational faculties, but it's also like they get in the way of things. Some rational faculties are meddlesome because of the faculties which are their tools, e.g., reflection, which is fikr, and consideration, which is nazar. This meddlesome nature leads them to rational consideration of the essence of God. Although the law has prohibited reflection upon God's essence. This is in the Quran and this is in the Hadith. So the reason he's saying that is because the rational faculty is something that we tend to uphold because it is in some ways a highly superior faculty. But because we overemphasize its value, we then ignore the other faculties, which leads to you producing a lopsided picture of God. That's the danger about it. So the reflective faculty and the intellectual, rational, considerative faculty is not supposed to reflect upon the essence of God. And if it does that, it is overstepping its boundaries. It is overstepping its boundaries.
Is there another faculty that can do that?
Is there any faculty that can do that? Let me think. So the short answer is that there's no faculty that can directly grasp God's essence, right? But if we just go one step beneath that and say, is there a faculty that can grasp positive knowledge about God? Because you see, the rational faculty is all about negative image. Sorry, it's about negative knowledge. Via negativa. It's about negating from God what is not appropriate to God. So it starts talking about God's essence and saying he's not this and he's not that, which can lead to problems. The spiritual heart, is the faculty that will give you positive information about God. It's the heart.
Yes, thank you. And it is connected to some degree with the hadith that says, the heart of the believer contains me, and so on.
Yes, yeah, it is directly connected to that hadith. This is exactly it. Yes, exactly. And then, so the rational faculty will say that hadith is impossible. That's why then Iman comes into the picture. Because the rational faculty can say, you know what, that's impossible. I don't believe in that. So the Iman will say, just shut up. Whether you can grasp it or not, it's true. So just believe it. So the rational faculty will have a very hard time with that. So such a rational faculty slips into considering the essence, thereby transgressing and wronging itself. So a rational faculty that is salim, it's sound, it is healthy, will say, whoa, what are you doing, my friend? Stop. I can't know anything about God's essence. So there's no point in reflecting upon God's essence. If that's a healthy intellect. It sets up what it supposes are proofs that the essence of God cannot be such and such.
nor can it be in such a manner. Reason negates from the essence everything that is attributed to temporally originate things, so that it will be distinct from them. Thereby, it constricts the essence and considers it delimited, which is the funny irony in trying to save the essence from being connected to anything that's created. And so you're trying to save it by making it unlimited, you actually end up making it limited. Ibn Arabi identifies the declaration of incomparability with the Quranic concept of tashbih or glorification. So this is actually, sorry, tasbih, afwan, my fault. Ibn Arabi identifies the declaration of incomparability with the Quranic concept of tasbih or glorification. Since the formula glory be to God, as employed in the Quran, involves a negation of some posited or limited attribute from God. So, for example, the Quran says, glory be to God, above what they describe, Subhanallah amma yasifun. Or they say, He has taken a son. Glory be to Him, Subhanahu. He is the independent. Moreover, the Quran repeats in several verses that everything in the heavens and the earth glorifies God, which is to say, in the Sheikh's interpretation, that everything declares that He is incomparable with itself. Glorification is to declare the incomparability of the Lord of inaccessibility, Rabb al-Izzah, the Lord of inaccessibility, above what they describe. Inaccessibility, so this is from the attribute of being Aziz, Izzah. Inaccessibility requires that true knowledge of Him cannot be accessed. That's why it's called inaccessible, cannot be attained. Glorification is a declaration of incomparability. It is not a laudation, thana, which is praise. It is not a laudation through a positive quality, amr thubuti. He cannot be lauded except through what is worthy of Him. But that which belongs to Him is not shared in common, musharaka, with anything. He can only be lauded through His names, but every one of His names, known to us, is assumed by the servant in his own trade, takhalluq. And by it, the servant, becomes qualified to the measure that is appropriate for him. Hence, there is no name worthy of God's unique essence. Since it is not possible for Him to be lauded within the cosmos as is worthy, He made the glorification of Him by all things into His laudation. That is why He attributes praise, hamd, to the glorification, saying glorifies by praising Him. So it would be something like yusabbihuhu bihamdihi. That's the word. Yusabbihuhu bihamdihi. So let me read that again. Because it's not possible for Him to be lauded within the cosmos as is worthy, He made the glorification of Him by all things into His laudation. So that is why He attributes praise to the glorification, saying glorifies by praising Him, i.e., by the laudation of which He is worthy. And that is only glorification. For God says, glory be to thy Lord, the Lord of inaccessibility, above what they describe. So this is like a big theme, the idea of glorification with praise, and he'll talk about it a lot in future chapters. God preserves the cosmos in order that laudation of Him will continue upon the tongue of the temporally originate things, through their declaring Him incomparable with the poverty that belongs to them. So they're glorifying God by saying, you're not like us. You're not poor. You're not needy. He does not preserve the cosmos out of concern, al-ihtimam, for it, nor out of solicitude, al-anaya, only so that it will be His locus of self-disclosure, majda, within which the properties of His names become manifest. This is an important point. God does not preserve the cosmos necessarily because He cares for it, like the way I care for my children. I want to preserve my children because I care for them. It's not like that for Him. And it's not out of solicitude, right? Our name is kind of like a providence. He doesn't need the cosmos. He preserves the cosmos because it will be what's called a locus of self-disclosure, a majla. It is the place in which he can reveal himself so that the properties of his names become manifest. I love to be known, so I made the cosmos so that I can become known. That's the only reason he made the cosmos. That's it. So that his names can become manifest. And how is he known? Through the cosmos? When it lauds him, it praises him through his glorification. So he preserves the cosmos for the sake of these glorifications. That's why we have in the Quran, Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam, what happened? He was swallowed by the whale, right? So what happened then? The
He
Quran
was doing
says,
musabbihin, like he was doing tasbih.
yes, yes. This is from Surah Al-Qalam. Lo, I'm forgetting the exact phrase, the exact way it's worded, but lo ma kana min musabbihin, if he was not from one of the musabbihin, either he would have been left in the belly of the whale till the day of judgment, or he would have been cast upon the shore with no one to help him. Right? And so he was one of the musabbihin, because what did he say? He said, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka. That's where it is, subhanaka. Subhanaka inni kuntu min adh-dhalimin. Subhanaka. So that's what saved him. That's the reason God preserves the cosmos. When someone declares God's incomparability, his declaration is measured according to his own level. Since he does not declare his creator's incomparability, except in respect of himself, since he only knows himself. This may not be a very meaningful paragraph to you, but it's a hugely important paragraph that will become clear later on. You can't glorify God according to what he deserves. So what you're doing is you're glorifying him according to your own level. That has a lot of implications, and it's connected to the problem of beliefs, having different beliefs. Declaring incomparability is diverse according to the diversity of the worlds, and the fact that every knower declares the real, incomparable in the measure of his knowledge of himself. He declares him incomparable with everything that belongs to himself, since everything that belongs to himself is temporally originated. Hence, he declares the real incomparable in respect to those temporally originated qualities pertaining to himself. That is why declaring the real's incomparability is diverse, in accordance with the diversity of the declarers. For example, an accident, like color and temperature are accidents. For example, an accident says, Glory be to him who is not poor in his being toward a locus in which to become manifest. Because, like, you know how like a color can't subsist by itself? Like, there's a red chair and a red book, but there's no such thing as red. So the color red is poor towards a thing to become red in. So it says, Subhana alladhi, glory be to the one who's not poor in his being toward a locus in which to become manifest. Then, so what is an accident poor towards? A substance, a johar. So then the substance says, glory be to him who is not poor in his being toward a bestower of existence, because the substance would not exist without someone to give it existence. And then a corporeal body, a jism, says, glory be to him who is not poor in his being toward instruments. Why? Because a body has no use and no function without limbs. Limbs. What are limbs? Instruments. The adah. Thus, declaring incomparability has been classified according to its major categories, ummahat, since there is nothing that is either substance, body, or accident. Then each kind of creature pertains specifically to certain things that other kinds do not possess. So it glorifies God in respect of those attributes in its own station. But perfect man glorifies God through all the glorifications in the cosmos. That includes beliefs, by the way. Are there any questions so far? And then, like, maybe we can, I don't know how much we can do for similarity. Yeah. So maybe we can try and read up to the end of page 73. Are there any questions so far? Because I think the idea is pretty simple, but it just still gets heavy going with the detailed explanations. I mean, maybe I might have phrased it poorly when I said just shut up to the mind, right? It's very important. But that's like when the mind wants to overstep its limits. That's when we say that to it. Um, and when sins and obeys their nafs, they tend to feel distant from Allah, can end up forgetting God completely. But when one operates from the ruh, we feel an intimate closeness. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Jazakallah khairan. Red not being red. So red is called an accident. Sidi Aqil. Red's called it's called an accident. So certain things are accidents, like temperatures and colors and measurement. They only exist through a substance. So red does not exist by itself. It exists in a substance. Does that make sense? So it is therefore poor towards the substance. Let me know if that doesn't make sense. Can someone take over, please?
Reading. Which read?
Go ahead. Thank you so much, Hannah. So, yeah.
Where do we stop?
We stopped on page 72, and it's the passage that is
Similarity, the sincere lover.
Yeah, the sincere lover. Yes, thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, the sincere lover is he who passes into the attributes of the beloved, not he who brings the beloved down to his own attributes. Do you not see that the real, when he loved us, descended to us in his hidden gentleness by means of that which corresponds munashaha to us, and above which his eminence and greatness are high exalted.
Munasaba, yes.
Oh, munasaba, sorry, I can't read that. He descended to one, receiving us joyfully when we come to his house in order to confide in him. 2, rejoicing at our repentance and our return to him after our turning away from him. 3, wonder at the young man who lacks, the young man who lacks sensual desire. What?
Yeah. Sorry about that. That was a good.
He wonders at the young man who lacks a sensual desire while he should be controlled by it, even though he has that through God's giving him success. 4, being our deputies in our hunger, thirst, and illness, and placing himself in our way stations. When one of his servants is hungry, he says to the others, I was hungry, but you did not feed me. He says to another of his servants, I was ill, but you did not visit me. When the servants ask him about this, he replies to them, verily so and so was ill. If you had visited him, you would have found me with him. So and so was hungry. If you had fed him, you would have found me with him. This is one of the fruits of love when he descends to us.
Can we just pause here?
Yeah.
So, are there any questions here? Because This is again heavy going, but this is tashbih. This is tashbih. And this is the kind of tashbih that the philosophers and some of the mutakallimun find disgusting. But God has described himself this way. This is what he does.
Why do they find it disgusting?
Because they incline towards the perspective of tanzih. And tanzih is a paradigm which is mainly based upon the idea that God should have no relationship between him and what is temporally originated, which means what is created in time. The eternal cannot have a relationship with what is non-eternal, what is created in time. You cannot describe the eternal with things that appear in time and space. That is why it is disgusting. And yet, God has described himself with those attributes.
How do they love God if they don't take into consideration this part of God? Or do they?
I'd have to double check this, but I think some of them believe it's not possible to love God.
Well, undoubtedly so, because it's very dry.
I mean, you can kind of feel it, and maybe some of them do affirm that you can love God. I mean, I hope I'm not saying anything that's incorrect about them. But they definitely, what is true though, that doesn't require too much research, is that they de-emphasize love. They do de-emphasize it, and it's very clear that they do that. Sidi Akil, you had your hand up, right?
Is it because they don't recognize the divinity in others? So they don't see it in others, hence why they don't see God.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way of putting it, because that statement would also disgust them as well, because that's the whole point in Tanzih. Tanzih is we're here and God is over there. So if God is quote unquote over there, by definition, you can't perceive the divinity in other people. Whereas God has says, wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. So you are right. I think you're right. Tashbih is to perceive the divinity in other people and beings, things. And tanzih is to make sure you don't perceive divinity in the things, but you only perceive it in the eternal. And it's also to do with it comes down to like a personal preference, your actual personality, and what your own preferences are, you know? It's not a coincidence. This is a topic that Ali Hussein can really elaborate on very, at length. The people who are more inclined towards art are also more inclined towards tashbih. Like, it's not a coincidence. And poetry, for example. See, you're raising your hand again, right?
Yep. I was going to say, Shaitan, Iblis, he couldn't see the divine in Adam when he was told to prostrate, and because he was only looking at the surface, that he was made from clay, I'm made from fire, and he's made from clay. But if he was to recognize, the raw and the divine within Adam, it would have elevated him instead of him feeling, belittled and sidelined.
This is such an excellent point of consideration. This is an excellent point to ponder and think about, because did Iblis perceive the ruh in Adam alayhi salam, which is divine, and he got jealous of it? Or was he blinded by the clay, the material of clay that stopped him from seeing the ruh that was inside it? خلقتني من نار وخلقته من sorry خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. You made me from fire and you made him from clay. So was the clay stopping him from seeing the divine light within Adam alayhi salam? Or did he know that the divine light was in it, but it made him jealous? This is a really interesting question to ask. And then the other thing that we can say is that is also part of the reason that maybe there's a disease, a spiritual malaise in people who cannot perceive the divine light in other people. This lack of tashbih, which is a really excellent point. And to be fair to the other mutakallimun, they're not like Iblis so long as they obey God's commands. Because now we're in the what's called the way station of the dunya, where things are mixed and confused. It's on the day of judgment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies things. So as long as they're not disobeying God's commands, then they're kind of like free from being seriously blamed. But some of them might get what's called like a telling off on the day of judgment, though. But as long as they've been pious and obeying God's command to the best that they can, then they're not quite like Iblis, though. But that's a really good point. Jazakumullah khair, mashallah. Okay. If there's any more questions, otherwise, Hannah, if you can carry on. We're here, right? Sorry, nowadays.
Nowadays, our companions suffer extreme pain at not being able to speak without restraint about God, as is appropriate, and as the prophets spoke without restraint. What prevents them from ascribing to God that which is ascribed to him by the revealed books and the messengers is the lack of justice on the part of the jurists, fuqaha, and the possessors of worldly authority, ulul amr, who listen to them. Such people hurry to declare anyone who says about God the like of what the prophets said an unbeliever. They have abandoned God's words. You have a good example in the Messenger of God, Quran 33:21. God also said to the prophet when he mentioned the prophets and messengers, those are they whom God has guided, so follow their guidance, 690. But the jurists have locked this door because of claimers who lie in their claims, and they have done well. The truthful servants suffer no harm because of this, since speaking and expressing such things is not indispensable. In those things of this sort which have come from the messenger of God, there is sufficiency for them, so they mention them and are happy with them. That is, such things as wonder, rejoicing, laughter, receiving joyfully, dissent, witness, love, and yearning. But were a friend of God to express these and similar matters, excuse me, and where's he on? Yeah, were a friend of God to express these and similar matters on his own, he would be declared an unbeliever and perhaps killed. Most of the esoteric scholars, the ulama al-nusum, I'm having really struggling reading this actually. I'm going to
ulama al-rusum.
Oh, rusum, yeah.
Who are the? So rusum is from rasam, which is the outline. It's the outline. It's the tracing of something. In this case, or in the original linguistic meaning, when rain falls upon the soil of the earth, the rain dries up. It leaves behind the traces of the rain. So from the traces, you realize, oh, there used to be rain. But that's a superficial tracing. So these are the superficial scholars who don't have the divine water.
Okay, most of the exoteric scholars lack the knowledge of this through tasting and drinking. So they deny such things in the Gnostics out of envy on their part. If it were impossible to ascribe such things to God, he would not have ascribed them to himself, nor would his messengers have ascribed them. But the envy of these people prevents them from seeing that they are rejecting the book of God and forbidding God's mercy from reaching some of his servants. Most of the common people followed the jurists in this denial, in imitation of them. No, on the contrary, praise belongs to God, the lesser part of the common people. As for kings, for the most part, they have not reached the witnessing of these realities because of their occupation with what has been turned over to them. So they support the exoteric scholars in their position, except for a few of them who have suspected the exoteric scholars in that, since these kings have seen that these authorities are dedicated to the chaff of this world, though they have no need for it, and to the love of position and leadership, and to accommodating the desires of kings in that which is not permitted by the law. So the knowers of God remain in the lowliness of incapacity and constraint, like a messenger to whom his people cry, lies, and in whom not one of them believes.
Okay, so there's actually so much to talk about here.
Yeah.
We're just going to stop here and talk about this passage. Then, like when we come back from the break till next year, inshallah, then we'll continue on this page. But let's just talk more about this because it's loaded and there's so much to say. Um, one of the first things that came to my mind is that the awliya, they draw from the same source as the prophets. That's not an exaggeration. And you've got to understand the weight of those words. So they can draw from the same divine source that the prophets draw upon to such an extent they experience revelation in the exact same way. No difference. There's no difference. So if you say that Rasulullah used to experience sweating when he was receiving the Quran, right? And he used to sometimes receive the Quran as images, or sometimes from Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. That's how the wali can receive it too, with no difference. There is one major difference, of course, and that is the wali is prohibited from what? Creating new law. He cannot say, I have now received a new hukm from the messenger who's called Jibreel alayhi salam, and I've received a new religion. The one who does that, he's a fraud. He's not to be listened to. But apart from that, they can receive revelation the same way it was given to the prophets, the same way Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was spoken to. A wali can be spoken to in that exact same way. Any messenger. So they can receive revelation from the direct source, directly from the source. And that is a tremendous thing. Why is that the case? Because you see, although Rasulullah he said that there are no more prophets. So that phrase from the hadith acts as a veil and confusion for people. But the Shaykh al-Akbar, he clarifies the hadith and says, wait a minute. When Rasulullah said there's no more prophets, what is he talking about? If anyone can remember this, because we talked about it sometime in the past. What does that hadith mean? There are no more prophets. What is he referring to?
Nabi. So there is no law, no prophet that basically what you said declares the law for the whole people. But it doesn't mean that there are no saints after that have.
But isn't it? I don't know.
Let's be even more specific from that. For sure, Ravina, there are saints, and no one would object to that necessarily. But here's the thing: there are two kinds of prophets. There are two kinds of prophets. One kind is called law-giving prophecy, al-nubuwah al-tashri'ah. That's the prophecy that's cut off. Do you see? The ability to create a new law, to bring a new religion, that's the nubuwah that's cut off. This is called nubuwah muqayyada, limited prophethood. But there's a second kind of prophethood that's called nubuwah amma, universal prophethood, in which they continue to receive reports, akhbar, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about himself, about his nature, and about his reality. That's not cut off. That's why we have these hadith that say prophethood is cut off, but what remains are what? Voracious dreams. What remains? 146th of prophethood, which is called good character. So there are remnants of prophethood that remain to this day, which is why we have the hadith from Rasulullah who says that the prophets do not bequeath as inheritance dinars and gold coins, but they bequeath knowledge, which is why the ulama, the knowers of God in my community, are to the prophets of the children of Israel. So the prophets continue to exist today. Those prophets who will make sure that we're not cut off from God. Because if there's no prophet, then we're cut off from God. They exist. They just can't create law. So if you define a prophet as someone who creates law, then you're right. There are no more prophets today. But that's a limited definition of prophethood. The prophet is someone who can receive divine news and reports and create law. So the one who creates law is cut off. But the one who receives divine reports is not cut off. They walk on this earth today. So they're also called anbiya awliya, prophet saints. They're called prophet saints, and they're given this name to distinguish them from the other awliya, because there's degrees of sainthood. It's to distinguish who runs with the horses versus who maybe runs with a different kind of animal, like the donkeys, which is still a noble animal, or a slower animal. But who runs with the horses? These prophet saints, run with those prophets to such an extent, because I translate this myself, and the book that I'm translating right now, I translate this myself, to such an extent that if these saints were born in the time of the prophets, they would have been given law-giving prophecy. They're not that different. It's just that today it's forbidden for them to receive law. But they have the ability to receive law. They could do it if they were born prior to the coming of Muhammad, if they're born in the past. That's it. So these people who receive akhbar illahiyya, these divine news and reporting, they still exist today. And so the fuqaha, or whichever profession they come from, or whoever they are, they get really mad if they hear awliya speaking like this, and they declare him a kafir when he's not. So this is what we're talking about. So they can bring you things that aren't explicitly laid down by the Prophet ﷺ in Hadith or in the Quran, but they don't contradict the Quran. They don't contradict the Hadith. If it were to contradict any of those, then they would be a fraud. Hannah, go ahead.
There was a bit where, you were talking about whether Iblis was jealous or not of Adam having the ruh, and then we see here the jurists are jealous of the awliyaullah, so that suggests to me that they're kind of reflecting that whole shaitanic jealousy.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's 100%. That's why Sidi Ali Hussein is fond of pointing this out, and he is correct because the Shaykh Al Akbar says it. He says that the jurists are to the awliya of our day what the pharaohs were to the prophets. But this should not lead us to having a bad opinion of the jurists, because the Shaykh Al Akbar says something where he says they were correct to close this gate. They were correct to close this gate. Why? Because there are pretenders, there are fakers, there are fakers. But that doesn't mean just because you close the gate, the real deal isn't out there. That's all. Where does Nabi versus Rasul differ, Irina? No. So universal prophethood means that, so Nubuwa Amma means they're not singled out specifically for receiving the law. They have general prophecy. So universal and general are the same words. They have a general prophecy, right? They don't have the specific permission to bring a new law. That's why it's called universal. They have the general permission to receive news about God and the ghaib and the unseen.
I understood this part, but I always in my mind was thinking about the word Rasul as you are describing Nubuwa Amma. So now I'm confused of what a Rasul is. You get on my...
This is a good question. This is a good question. A Rasul must have a qawm, because he sent arsala, right? Or ursila ila qawmihi. A Nabi does not have to have a qawm.
What is a qawm?
A people.
Uh-huh.
So ursila ila qawmihi, he was sent to his people. A prophet doesn't have to have that. So often a messenger will found and establish a whole community. A prophet does not have to do that. A prophet could just be someone who comes into time and space, does what he's supposed to do, and dies, but he does not establish a new community.
But when you talked about limited prophethood, you said that the limited prophethood brings a law. And
yes,
when someone brings a law, the law must be brought to a people, right? The limited prophethood.
So of course, these are subsuming categories. Like on a pyramid, the Rasul is on the top of the pyramid. Beneath him is the Nabi, and beneath the Nabi is the Wali. So every messenger is a prophet and saint. But not every prophet is a messenger.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
And then Zanira is also correct. A Rasul, so if a Rasul is sent to a qawm, in addition, a Rasul must have a risala. He must have a risala. And she's also right. A Nabi can create law or follow a previous law. And a Rasul a Rasul always creates law, as far as I'm aware. A Rasul always creates law, as far as I'm aware. And certainly, yes, Yasmin. Sheikh Al-Akbar considers that Sittah Maryam alayhi salam, she is a prophet. And the mother of Musa alayhi salam, she had nubuwa, awha ilayha. It's in the Quran. She had wahi. So this is correct. Which is why bees are also prophets, because they have wahi. But their wahi is ilham, inspiration. I talked about this in my first or third class in one of my courses. Nubuwa is a reality that flows throughout the whole of creation. So there's like prophets amongst trees, there's prophets amongst stones and mountains, prophets amongst animals, and there's prophets amongst insects too, not just human beings. And that's a whole other subject. Um, yes. So, are there any other questions?
Just could you tell us the Arabic word for limited prophethood?
نبوة مقيدة. And the other one, so actually, yes. So that's نبوة مقيدة. And the other one is نبوة مطلقة or نبوة عامة. عامة. نبوة عامة or نبوة مطلقة.
Thank you.
Ibrahim alayhi salam was a Rasul, yes. I don't know that Lut alayhi salam was a prophet. I know that he was a prophet and messenger. But if someone can just double check that and let me know. Would love a visual diagram right now charting the in-betweens of an awliya. You know what, Akhir Sidi? All that is in the book of Michel Chodkovitz from his book, The Seal of Sainthood. The Seal of Sainthood. Khatam al-Awliya. Um, and then, yeah, someone should make like a diagram. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I think if there are no more questions, let's just call it an evening. And everyone have a good night, inshallah. And listen, here, let me just stop the recording for now. So